Take a look at these carvings, petroglyphs from the American Southwest, the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. Cultures that never met, separated by oceans and thousands of years, yet somehow they carved the same thing. Some are abstract, others eerily specific. Were they doodles, messages, a record of something much bigger? This is the mystery of the petroglyphs. And after a few of you have pointed me in this direction, I started digging in. And once I was in this rabbit hole, I couldn't stop. I'll list the resources I used for this in the description below. And I'll tell you one thing now, that once you see this, you won't be able to unsee it. Whether you're brand new to this or already deep down the plasma glyph rabbit hole, my goal was not only to explore this phenomenon, but also to add something unique and new to the conversation. We're going to break down who Anthony Peratt is, what this well-known plasma physicist proposed, how the theory works, expanded ideas, and some connections I haven't seen discussed anywhere else. I'm Adrienne. This is Biolumination, where we follow the light in science even when it takes us to unexpected places. If this sounds like your kind of journey, I hope you'll consider being part of the community. Let's start with the basics now. Petroglyphs are rock carvings made by chipping, pecking, or scratching onto stone. They exist on every continent, but when you zoom out and compare them, something strange happens. Across the world, from the deserts of Arizona to the cliffs of Armenia, from northern Scandinavia to the deep canyons of Chile, we find reoccurring shapes, figures with bent limbs and radiating lines, concentric circles, branching patterns that look almost electric. And they show up in places with no known connection, different languages, different beliefs, different timelines, but somehow always the same forms. These aren't idle doodles. Carving into stone takes time, effort, and purpose. Some researchers suggest that they were just spiritual symbols or the result of altered states, and some possibly were. But to me, the consistency and the correlation to them and plasma, as you'll see in a minute, it's just too strong to ignore. To the people who carved them, they meant something. They were preserved deliberately, etched into rock in order to survive storms, floods, and time itself. So what were they recording? Something they saw, something they remembered, or something they felt they needed to pass on for humanity's sake? Because once you start to see the patterns, you can't help but wonder, how did this happen? And what were they really trying to tell us? Before we dive in, it's essential to understand the man behind it. Anthony Peratt is a distinguished plasma physicist with a career spanning several decades. He earned his PhD in electrical engineering and plasma physics from the University of Southern California in 1971. He went on to work at some of the most respected scientific institutions in the United States. His roles included the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory from 1972 to 1979. He also worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory from 1981 until his retirement. There, he served in the Applied Theoretical Physics Division and eventually as acting director of the National Security Nuclear Nonproliferation Directorate. In addition to his research in space plasma, electromagnetic pulse propagation, and pulsed power systems, he also holds patents in advanced electromagnetic radiation technologies, including a pulsed power conical amplifier designed for high-frequency energy applications. He's the real deal. He's not a fringe theorist, a real scientist working at the intersection of energy, space, and national defense. And yet, on some level, he stumbled onto the petroglyph mystery by accident. He was living in the American Southwest, surrounded by rock carvings, and he had synchronicity on his side. Because it wasn't until he started getting people showing him these pictures of these glyphs that he realized something strange was going on. Some of the high energy patterns from his lab and these glyphs looked familiar. Too familiar, in fact. Peratt later commented when he first encountered photos of these glyphs before he knew what they were, that he said something along the lines like, "How did these people get access to classified material?" That question pulled him out of the lab and into the field. Over the following years, he and a small team documented more than 50,000 petroglyphs across multiple continents, mapping, photographing, and comparing them to plasma phenomena. He wasn't looking for spiritual metaphors, he was looking for patterns, geometry, and consistency, the same thing he looked for in experimental plasma discharges. And what he found convinced him that these carvings may not just be mythological at all. They might be records of something massive, an atmospheric plasma event so extreme it left the same signature in stone across the entire planet. If that's true, the real mystery isn't what the shapes mean then. It's what kind of world did our ancestors live in when they saw them? Next, we're going to go through a couple of slides. I'm going to disappear for just a moment so you can focus on the connection between plasma and petroglyphs. On the left, what you're looking at is a depiction of something called a Birkeland current. These are powerful electric currents that flow into and out of Earth's upper atmosphere, especially near the poles. They follow the planet's magnetic field lines, and this part is important. They've been directly measured by satellites. At their peak, they can carry millions of amps of electricity. But under extreme conditions, something else can begin to happen. These currents don't just glow, they can evolve into something more dynamic. What you're seeing here on the right is the early stage of a phenomenon known as a Z pinch, a tightly compressed plasma column that begins to self organize due to its own magnetic fields. In this simulation, you can see that process unfolding. The yellow areas represent energy flowing inward and outward, while the red core marks the high intensity current channel running through the center. And this is where the mystery deepens. As the column continues to evolve, it doesn't stay a simple funnel. It can begin to twist, buckle, and morph, forming structures like rings, hourglasses, ladders, and spirals. Each one represents a stage in the plasma's natural instability, and each one remarkably resembles glyphs carved into stone by ancient cultures around the world. This is the seed of connection between plasma physics and petroglyphs. What you're looking at here is one of the most surprising things I came across while reading Peratt's work. This isn't a collection of unrelated plasma shapes. These are all different stages or viewing angles of the same underlying phenomenon, a high energy Z pinch column. Depending on the plasma's energy level, the observer's angle, or the stage of the column's evolution, it can take on dramatically different forms. On the left, we see experimental and simulated images showing the column forming stacked toroids, like a cosmic spine or a ladder of plasma rings. As we move to the right, the structure begins to twist. Instabilities form along the edges, causing what was once a symmetrical column to become serpentine, forked, or even mushroom like in appearance. And here's the key: these variations are not random. Plasma follows well understood electromagnetic principles, especially under extreme current. And in laboratory experiments, including Z pinch radiographs like these shapes emerge again and again. Our ancestors may have witnessed a sky event so powerful, so unusual, that it left a mark, not just in Earth's electromagnetic history, but in human memory. And once you start seeing these forms, you start seeing them everywhere. As the electric current through the plasma increases, the initially stable straight column becomes unstable. Magnetic fields generated by the current begin to compress the plasma radially, a process known as the Z pinch. Under high energy conditions, this compression doesn't just squeeze the plasma, it causes it to self organize into a series of stacked toroids, donut shaped loops aligned along the column's axis. These toroids are not solid structures, but regions of intensified current density and plasma density. Visually, they can resemble repeated bands or rungs along the column, almost like beads on a string or vertebra in a plasma spine. In the first frame, we see a conceptual model of this structure, a simplified diagram of the toroidal Z-pinch phase. Right beside it are experimental X-ray radiographs showing this exact structure forming in real time. The toroids become visible as discrete, high-intensity segments, proving that the plasma is self-organizing under extreme current. Now compare this to the petroglyphs. These so-called ladder or caterpillar glyphs have been found on rocks around the world, from Europe to Utah. And they don't just vaguely resemble these structures. In many cases, the proportions and spacing are nearly identical to what's been observed in both laboratory experiments and computer simulations. Peratt overlaid plasma geometry onto particular petroglyphs and found a match down to the number of rungs and their alignment. So the question is, why would ancient people carve such specific, repeating patterns again and again on every continent? According to Peratt, it's because they witnessed it in the sky. This wasn't just a theoretical discharge, it was visible, possibly terrifying, but either way, it was magnificent. Now we are looking at one of the most iconic transitions in Anthony Peratt's research, the moment a stable plasma column morphs into something carved into stone across cultures, the figure known as the squatter man. On the left side of the slide, we see both experimental and simulated models of a high energy Z pinch. At this stage, the increasing electrical current causes the plasma column to undergo dramatic instabilities. It begins to bulge, twist, and compress, transitioning from a straight column into stacked toroids. These toroids don't stay symmetrical. They begin to flatten and deform, producing a configuration with lobes and constrictions. When viewed from the right angle, this structure closely resembles a human-like figure with arms raised and legs spread, a shape found in petroglyphs around the world. In some cases, additional features emerge, such as dots, arcs, matching carved elements like horns or halos seen in many squatter man glyphs. What's remarkable is that these plasma forms aren't just theoretical. On the right, you can see petroglyphs from around the world that match this phase, not from a single region, but from every inhabited continent, from the deserts of Arizona and Nevada to Sweden, Brazil, Pakistan, and Australia. These forms are nearly identical, and they weren't all made at the same time. Some are thousands of years apart, yet they all depict the same structure. In plasma physics, this configuration is brief but intensely luminous. To someone witnessing it in the sky, it may have looked like a towering, radiant, human-like figure, burned into the memory through sheer spectacle. Peratt proposed that what we now call the squatter man wasn't originally a god or a symbol, it was a plasma instability, a real physical event. But over time, it became mythologized, ritualized, and immortalized into stone. In a way, once you see it through this lens, the squatter man stops being a mystery and becomes a clue. Now, at first glance, these shapes might look like birds or hourglasses, but in plasma physics, they mark a critical turning point. As the Z pinch continues to evolve, the column experiences what's known as pinch instabilities. The tightly compressed plasma begins to flare outward at the ends, creating a double-lobed structure, often narrow in the middle and wide at the top and bottom. This phase doesn't last long, but when viewed from the side, it produces a shape that resembles an hourglass, a Y figure, or even a bird with wings extended. On the left, you can see experimental images and simulation models showing this structure. The bright regions at the top and bottom mark the plasma's lobes, while the center remains a narrow high current channel. Now compare that to the petroglyphs on the right. From Arizona to Okinawa, from canyon walls to carved tablets, we see remarkably similar shapes. Wide branches, hourglass bodies. Some even include rib-like rungs or markings that mirror plasma layering during this phase. According to Peratt, this wasn't symbolic art, it was observational. People weren't imagining bird spirits or mythic beings, not yet. They were drawing what they saw, a towering, radiant, hourglass shaped plasma hanging in the sky. And like the squatter man, it became ritualized, remembered, and recorded. This one is the most visually distinct phases in the entire Z-pinch sequence. So far, we've mostly seen the plasma column from the side, revealing shapes like ladders, hourglasses, and the squatter man. But what happens when the same high-energy plasma structure is viewed end-on from directly above or below? This is the result. Two bright, circular plasma lobes, symmetrical, glowing, and intense. In lab simulations and radiographs, this shape is unmistakable. It looks like a pair of eyes staring back. Now compare that to the glyphs on the right. These owl eyes show up in petroglyphs across multiple continents, often alongside the squatter man or ladder figures. They appear as pairs of dots, concentric circles, or eye-like shapes carved into stone. Peratt proposed that this was the same plasma column, just seen from a different angle. In plasma physics, this configuration is a double torus, compressed and viewed head-on. The outer edges flare with light, while the dark center marks the high-density axis. It's brief, but it's bright. And to anyone watching the sky, it might have looked like a giant face, a glowing mask, or presence suspended above. This owl eye phase is a fleeting moment of symmetry captured in both physics and stone. As the Z-pinch plasma becomes increasingly unstable, something strange begins to form at the edges. Instead of staying smooth and symmetrical, the outer boundaries of the current begin to arc outward, forming structures that look like horns, loops, or even crown-like extensions. These aren't random distortions. They're a known part of high current plasma behavior, driven by magnetic field interactions and edge instabilities. In the lab, these horn shapes appear at the top of the column or along the boundary, just before the structure breaks apart. In Peratt's experiments and simulations, you can see them forming as distinct arcing patterns, some symmetrical, others spiraling off center. Now compare that to the glyphs. On rock walls across the world, we see figures with horns, radiant arcs, or crown silhouettes. Some match these patterns almost exactly, especially the multi-lobed or repeated horn motifs seen in petroglyph rows. Peratt proposed that these glyphs captured a later phase in the plasma's evolution, when the main column began to destabilize and loop outward, forming a radiant crown above the Earth. This horned phase is a visual threshold between structure and chaos, preserved in stone. In the final stages of the Z-pinch's evolution, the structure becomes increasingly unstable. As it twists and deforms, it may no longer resemble a symmetrical column at all. What remains is a silhouette, a compressed, hunched, and kinked structure, glowing briefly before collapse. In some simulations and radiographs, these late-stage instabilities resemble figures bending forward, almost as if hunched under pressure or force. Now take a look at the glyphs. Across cultures from the American Southwest to Africa, Colombia, and Sri Lanka, we find hunched figures with unusual posture. Some hold what appears to be a flute or staff. Others seem to be caught mid-stride, twisted or arced, often with exaggerated limbs or curved backs. Peratt noted that many petroglyphs resemble the outer silhouette of unstable, late stage plasma discharges. This is where myth meets physics. The figure we now call Kokopelli, often seen as a symbol of music or fertility, may have originated as a visual echo of an unstable plasma event seen in profile, distorted by motion, mythologized through memory. In this phase, the plasma doesn't just light up the sky, it casts a shadow, a shape, a posture, a figure burned into the minds of those who witnessed it. In the final moments of a high energy plasma discharge, the structure doesn't simply vanish. It breaks apart, sometimes violently, and emits one last burst of energy. This phase is known as a collapse or terminal instability. The once ordered column becomes a ring of expanding light, a kind of radiant echo of everything that came before. What remains is often circular, symmetrical, bright, a plasma ring sometimes surrounded by rays or radial lines. On this slide, we see glyphs that mirror that exact shape. For multiple sites around the world, these carvings show concentric rings, sunburst patterns, and radial flares, all centered around a circle. These were not just artistic expressions. They may represent the final stage of a massive plasma event, a sudden, brilliant configuration etched not just in memory, but in stone. To those watching from below, this collapse could have looked like the sky opened, flared, and sealed itself in a ring of fire. This is the collapse phase, when plasma, after dancing through its shapes and shadows, finally releases its energy. I hope by viewing those slides, you were able to see the direct connection between plasma and its many different states and the petroglyphs that were written in stone across the world. We trace the evolution of a high energy plasma event not as theory, but as a visual sequence modeled in the lab and written on stone. Starting with the Birkeland currents, we followed how a plasma column intensifies into a Z-pinch, then morphs through a series of dramatic shapes: toroids, hourglasses, the squatter man, bird forms, owl eyes, horned arcs, kinked silhouettes, and finally a collapsing ring of light. Each of the shapes that we explored corresponds to a phase of plasma instability, and remarkably, each one appears as a petroglyph on rock walls across the world. According to Anthony Peratt, these aren't symbols of imagination. They may be observational records, carved by people who saw something so extraordinary in the sky. By arranging these images in sequence, we haven't just connected physics and archaeology. We've reconstructed a possible shared memory, a moment when the heavens lit up with patterns no one could forget, a cosmic event burned up in the sky and carved into stone. Now that we've hopefully laid the foundation between the connection between plasma and petroglyphs, now I'd like to answer how Peratt thought this happened. Ultimately, he ended up suggesting his South Pole column hypothesis. He suggested that during a time of extreme geomagnetic disturbance, possibly triggered by a solar event or reversal, a massive plasma discharge may have extended from the Earth's southern polar region aligned with Earth's magnetic field. This discharge would have formed a towering Z-pinch, a column of light and plasma reaching into space far brighter than any aurora. It would have been visible across large parts of the world. But here's the key. What people saw depended on where they were standing. A person near the South Pole might have seen the column from directly below, appearing as a ring or owl eye formation. Someone at mid-latitudes would have seen it from the side, producing views of ladder-like toroids, the squatter man, or flaring hourglass shapes. Farther out, only partial silhouettes or radiant arcs may have been visible, possibly inspiring glyphs of horned figures or spirals. To test this theory, Peratt led a global survey of countless petroglyphs across 139 countries. Each glyph was documented, photographed, and GPS tagged, allowing researchers to correlate the type of glyph with the latitude of the observer. The result was kind of reverse engineering, using the patterns carved into rock to reconstruct the 3D geometry of the original plasma event. But Peratt didn't stop there. In his later work, he developed a system of holographic computing to model how a single plasma event would appear from different viewpoints around the world. This technique allowed him to simulate the same plasma structure as it would be seen by multiple observers at different latitudes and orientations, helping explain the diversity of glyphs while preserving their underlying coherence. To Peratt, the global consistency of these shapes wasn't a coincidence, it was a record, a memory not written in language, but carved into stone by people who witnessed something extraordinary. Now, Anthony Peratt's research laid the foundation, connecting ancient carvings to cutting-edge plasma physics in a way few had imagined. But as with all scientific ideas, it didn't end there. The real strength of science is that it invites refinement. And one of the voices that joined this conversation was one who worked closely with Peratt himself. In 2013, researcher Marianus Anthony van der Sloys, along with Robert J. Johnson, took a closer look at the geometry of that hypothesis. They agreed with Peratt's core idea that many glyphs do in fact correspond to plasma behavior, but they raised a couple of key issues. Not all glyphs could have been created from the same perspective of a single stationary column located at the South Pole. In particular, they noted that the latitude of the glyph sites, especially in the northern hemisphere, makes it impossible to see a vertically orientated column above the South Pole. Even with Peratt's suggestion that the column might have been bent eastward, the visibility constraints and field of view inconsistencies remained unsolved. Additionally, he noted that circular glyphs, which Peratt interpreted as viewing the column from directly underneath, showed up across a much wider geographic range than would be possible if there were just one column fixed in space. Van der Sloys proposed his own hypothesis. Rather than one massive discharge, what if there were multiple auroral columns distributed across time and space? He ended up suggesting that during geomagnetic reversals or excursions, Earth's magnetic field becomes unstable. The dipole weakens, the poles may wander toward the equator, or temporarily split into quadrupoles or octopoles, opening the door for plasma columns to form in multiple locations and even shift over centuries. In this model, some cultures may have witnessed plasma columns over the South Pole. Others may have seen different columns emerging from mid-latitude field lines or forming above temporary magnetic poles. Columns could appear and disappear as the magnetic field changed, offering a more flexible, globally distributed explanation for why so many similar glyphs show up around the world, yet don't always line up with the South Pole view. Importantly, he does not reject Peratt's work. In a way, he just extends it. The plasma forms he modeled are still valid. The glyph correlation still holds, but instead of requiring that all the carvings come from one single event, this refinement opens the door to a series of plasma events, possibly occurring across different regions and eras, all shaped by Earth's dynamic magnetic field. So far, we've focused on petroglyphs, carvings in stone that appear to match particular phases of plasma discharges, stage by stage. That might not be the whole story, though. If people really witness something this powerful, something bright enough to light up the sky and strange enough to carve into rock, wouldn't they have remembered it in other ways too? Across culture, across time, we find persistent patterns in mythology, references to great lights in the sky, to cosmic battles, to gods that descend in fire and rise up in blinding radiance. These are sky gods, world pillars, and fiery serpents, stretching from heaven to earth, often described as luminous, overwhelming, or divine. In Norse mythology, there's the Bifrost Bridge, a flaming arc connecting Earth to the realm of the gods. In Mesoamerica, we have Quetzalcoatl, who descends from the heavens as a radiant feathered serpent. In Vedic texts, the god Indra uses thunderbolts to split open the sky. Even in biblical traditions, Ezekiel describes wheels of fire and living creatures rising in brilliance. These stories aren't identical, but they share visual elements that sound a lot like bright, structured light in the sky. They echo the forms we've already seen: arcs, rings, radiance, and towering columns. And then there are the monuments, not just places of burial or timekeeping, but perhaps also of remembrance. Take Stonehenge, for example. Its orientation aligns with solar cycles, but was it only tracking time? Or could its shape, circular, radiant, concentric, also echo the visual memory of a ringed plasma form rising in the sky? Or consider Newgrange in Ireland, a megalithic passage tomb older than the pyramids. It was designed so that a shaft of light enters only at winter solstice. But inside, the motifs carved into the stone were spirals, circles, zigzags, all resembling the same plasma inspired forms we've seen around the world. Then there's Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, an ancient ceremonial site dating back to around 6000 BCE, which predates Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. Its stone alignment tracks the solstice sun, but also may point toward important celestial positions. Could it be that these weren't just calendars, but memorials to the sky event they witnessed? Structures built not only to observe the heavens, but to remember what once appeared there. And beyond the monuments and myths, what about oral traditions, songlines, epic poems, tribal dance, or ritual art? They may encode fragments of ancient experience passed down for generations, their original meaning now obscured by time. What if the symbols on cave walls, the serpent gods, and the alignment of stone all stem from the same origin? An actual, visible plasma event in Earth's sky. What if we've literally been walking around in the cultural aftershock of that moment all along? Sure, at this point, we've kind of stepped outside the bounds of confirmed data, just following the pattern, all the way through mythology, architecture, and memory. At this point in my research, I was still left with a pretty big question, and perhaps you do as well. Since we do not know for certain that there was one big massive event in the South Pole that everyone could see, or if there were numerous events that happened across planet Earth and time, is there another way for these images to appear in such similar form across cultures, continents, and centuries? If Peratt is right, then some people may have witnessed a real plasma event and carved what they saw. But what if others never saw it at all and still drew the same shapes? That brings us to a different kind of mystery, one that goes beyond physics and into the realms of fields, memory, and consciousness. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake proposed a theory called morphic resonance. At its core, it suggests that once a form or behavior occurs in nature, it becomes more likely to occur again, not just through genetics or imitation, but through fields of memory that exist beyond the brain. In his view, there are morphogenic fields that shape the development of organisms, and these fields carry a kind of habitual memory, passed on not through molecules, but through resonance. Could the same idea apply to symbols? Could certain visual patterns, especially those tied to powerful natural forces like plasma, become part of a shared visual language, something people around the world could tune into, even if they didn't witness the original event? Sure, it's speculative, but it might explain why spirals, concentric rings, and the squatter man figure reappeared not just in petroglyphs, but in later forms of sacred art, and even perhaps in more modern mysteries. For instance, some crop circles bear striking visual resemblance to plasma instabilities, with radial symmetry, concentric forms, or spiraling wave structures. Now, I haven't had time to fully go down this rabbit hole to see if there's a connection, but what I found, I think it's just worth noting. If you come across anything, be sure to let me know, the community know, send me an email, and I would love to take a look. Now, we don't know exactly how crop circles are formed. However, I vote plasmoids, but their pattern seems to echo something ancient, something familiar. All of this raises a larger question. Is there a kind of visual field shaped by electromagnetic processes or a collective memory that influence how we create and recognize certain forms? Could there be an unseen layer of memory, not just in our minds, but in the field around us? We don't have the answers yet, but asking the question opens the door not just to understand what our ancestors recorded, but how these patterns might still resonate with us now. After going through all of this, the science and the global glyphs, I've been left with quite the sense of wonder. I truly thank you for recommending me to take a look at this connection. The similarities between Peratt's plasma models and carvings found around the world feel too consistent to dismiss. Even if we question the exact mechanism or timing, there's clearly a meaningful pattern here, one that seems to echo across space, time, and culture. Peratt's work is deeply compelling. He didn't just propose a theory, he backed it with lab experiments, global surveys, and decades of plasma research. His ability to connect high energy physics with ancient art is something few have attempted, let alone accomplished with such precision. Still, I find myself wondering if the story is more layered. The idea of a single massive event is bold, and perhaps a bit limiting, though. It may not fully explain the range of perspectives seen by those who drew the same symbols. Personally, I lean more towards a flexible view. But what do I know? I'm not a plasma physicist and I'm not as smart as Peratt. But from what I've seen, I think that probably multiple events may have occurred. Plasma displays appearing in different skies at different times. That these moments left behind more than visual impressions. Maybe they seeded a kind of symbolic memory, passed down through story, rhythm, and ritual. And maybe some of these forms continue to arise through deeper patterns in nature itself, patterns we're only beginning to understand. I hope you share what you think. I'm certainly always open to having my opinion enhanced. I don't think we've solved the mystery yet completely, but I do think we've opened an intriguing door, a connection that can't be ignored, one that connects plasma, perception, and cultural memory in ways that feel worth exploring. Okay, we've looked at a lot, but here's a final note I'll leave you with. Whether recorded in stone, story, or something stranger, something left a mark. What do you think it was? If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you want to follow more content like this, you know what to do. Until next time, take care.